some positive leftist news with Holly and Silver Spook.
Hey everyone, this is Silver Spook and Holly, and this is Positive Leftist News. Positivity from around the world to balance the fire hose of disinformation and doom so prevalent elsewhere.
To start off 2023 on PLN, we have good news to share from West Africa, the Dakota, Hawaii, and more. Here we go.
After 40 years of imprisonment, the longest-held Palestinian political prisoner, Karim Younes, is set to be released at age 66. While awaiting freedom, he wrote a letter to his people. I am returning to sing with my people everywhere the anthem of my country, Fida'i, the anthem of return and liberation. This gives us renewed hope and an unwavering certainty in the justice of our cause, the sincerity of our belonging, and the feasibility and essence of our struggle. I will leave my cell, raising my hat to a generation that is clear that they are stronger, more daring, more brave, and more deserving of receiving the flag. How can they not, when they are the ones who have memorized every story and novel of the martyred, and are eager to implement their wills, the wills of our dispersed and displaced people, by wresting their right to return and self-determination. Blessed is this rising generation, despite the breathless atmosphere.
The 17-day Dakota Prayer Ride and Water Walk kicked off on December 10th last year and culminated in a procession of horseback riders moving into Mankato, Minnesota on December 26th to honor the 38 Dakota warriors hanged by President Abraham Lincoln on that day in 1862, in the shameful largest mass execution in U.S. history. About 100 riders rode from their homes throughout South Dakota and elsewhere to gather at Sisseton to begin the ride. Dakota runners started on December 25th from Fort Snelling in St. Paul, Minnesota, and joined the riders at Reconciliation Park in Mankato. Several riders displayed messages on horse blankets and jackets, including calls to address the crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women and children. One of the water walkers, Paula Looking Horse, said that planning this year reflected the thought of all the streams and rivers that the walk would cross over and how contaminated many are from dairy farm operations, as well as the 2017 bitumen spill that happened just west of the Sisseton-Wahpeton Reservation. As we walked the path along the Minnesota, we felt our ancestors' presence all the way. We prayed for the healing of the water. She added, this year we also raised awareness about the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous men, women, and children. All of these issues are connected. If you don't respect the people, you can't respect the land or the water. From Turtle Island to Palestine, occupation is a crime. We encourage all PLN viewers to get involved and support struggles like this for land back everywhere.
More than 363 acres of land on Molokai in Hawaii has been returned to the Department of Hawaiian Homelands from the unlawful control of the U.S. Air Force. While this is ostensibly good news, we certainly can't and won't celebrate the U.S. Army for this naked attempt to clean up their PR and decrease outrage over their illegal occupation of Hawaii, and the Department of Hawaiian Homelands itself has done little to help Native Hawaiians and actually tore down sacred Hawaiian prayer sites during the Mauna Kea struggle. While we condemn these institutions, it is certainly positive that the U.S. Empire feels so threatened by the Hawaiian sovereignty and anti-U.S. occupation movement that they need to make gestures like this.
Also in Hawaii, the Onipa'a Peace March commemorated 130 years since the Hawaiian monarchy was illegally overthrown by the U.S. These movements are alive and thriving across the archipelago. On January 17th, thousands of protesters, including 2,000 students, joined the Onipa'a Peace March from Mana'ala Royal Mausoleum to Iolani Palace. This was followed by a rally featuring music and speeches from Kanaka Maoli leaders to commemorate the 130 years since the Hawaiian monarchy was illegally overthrown by U.S. industrialists. Kalahui Hawaii organizer Heolani Sodona Pale said a small group of American businessmen overthrew a peaceful nation without provocation with the help and support of the United States military. The U.S. acknowledged and apologized for their role in the overthrow in 1993 with the Apology Bill, but never took any real action to correct the wrong they did to the native people of this land. Just because 130 years pass since this injustice doesn't mean the painful consequences aren't still keenly felt today. It's never too late to return all that was stolen from the Kanaka Maoli people.
Nurses from Mount Sinai and Montefiore hospitals of New York won historic gains after a 3-day strike over safe patient-to-staff ratios, fair wages, and to maintain existing healthcare benefits. More than 7,000 nurses at 2 New York City hospitals ended a 3-day strike and returned to work on Thursday after they resolved what they said was the major sticking point in negotiations with the hospitals: too few nurses. The pandemic saw a critical shortage of nurses due to burnout and poor working conditions, and striking nurses claim that medical institutions have not done enough to get nurses back. Nancy Higgins, the president of the union, said, "When you become a patient in a New York hospital, you should have enough nurses to care for you, no matter who you are. Nursing has to become a sustainable profession that keeps us at the bedside, now and for the future generation of nurses that we need to build up. Congratulations to New York nurses."
Around 10,000 ambulance workers in England and Wales struck shortly after that, followed the next week by another strike by healthcare workers who are part of the GMB, a general trade union. Further strikes have been planned for February, and these walkouts will be the biggest so far, with more than a third of NHS trusts in England and all but one Welsh health board affected unless there is movement on pay. The Royal College of Nursing, or RCN, said it has no choice as workers struggle to make ends meet. The nurses want a 19% pay increase to compensate for a decade of wage cuts and staff shortages. Yet NHS officials are only offering a 4% increase. There is a high level of support for the nurses and NHS staff. A recent poll by The Independent found that 2/3 of respondents would back the NHS nurses, including their taking more strike actions in 2023 if pay demands are not met. A majority of those polled expressed support for actions by rail workers, bus drivers, postal workers, and teachers, including future strikes.
150 people from political parties, trade unions, and people's movements across West Africa gathered in Ghana over 3 days last month to devise strategies to resist imperialism. The conference comes at a time in which there are heightened anti-imperialist sentiments and actions across the region. For example, mass protests have taken place against French military presence in West Africa, as well as strikes and agitations against the policies of international financial institutions such as the IMF. Similarly, Kieretwe Opoku of the Socialist Movement of Ghana condemned attempts at imperialism via the seizing of West Africa's military, as well as the multilateral capitalist system, which has been used as a means of direct colonialism. The conference discussed the factors that led to underdevelopment and how to ensure West Africa can gain control over their resources. The Aurora Pius of the National Network of Small-Scale Farmers Groups in Tanzania said that this was a powerful demonstration of solidarity and internationalism, strengthening joint efforts of resistance.
On Friday, the 6th of January, thousands took to the streets of Pakistan's South Waziristan district to demand peace and an end to the violence between the army and groups such as the Tehreek-e-Taliban-e-Pakistan. In recent weeks, 11 militants were killed and increased incidents of violence have been widespread throughout different regions of Pakistan. The rally consisted of political workers, activists, and young people bearing white flags, placards, and slogans. Lawmaker and representative from North Waziristan, Mohsin Dawar, stated, "Our people refuse to be used as cannon fodder and scapegoats in the new great game being imposed on the region. We want to tell the United States and the state of Pakistan that our people will not allow the imposition of proxy wars on Pashtun lands. We will resist any and all attempts to impose proxy wars on our lands."
The unionized workers at HarperCollins in New York City have been on strike since November 10th to fight the atmosphere of exploitation, which has kept the industry overwhelmingly white and limited to those who can afford to be paid less than a living wage in a city that was officially declared the most expensive in the world in 2022 by the Economist Intelligence Unit. Despite reporting record profits in 2021, HarperCollins has so far refused the 3 main demands of the striking workers, which are to raise its minimum starting salary from $45,000 to $50,000, address the lack of diversity in its workforce, and provide more security for unionized workers despite the strike receiving support from New York State senators and other politicians, authors, and other creatives in the industry and the general public. In the United States, the national support for labor unions is at 71%, the highest it's been since 1965. Workers are committed to staying on strike as long as it takes and are bringing their full range of talents to the effort. Strikers have been posting their artwork and slogans to social media, many of which riff on popular book titles, demonstrating the long-standing tradition of art's power and importance in protest something we always love to see.
Thousands of LGBTQ+ people and their allies took to the streets of New Delhi, India this month to march for same-sex marriage, some of them walking for more than an hour just to get close to Parliament where this decision is being considered. India does not currently recognize same-sex marriage officially, though couples are allowed to engage in an unregistered cohabitation, something that falls incredibly short of the rights enjoyed by married heterosexual couples. More than 2,000 people joined the Delhi Queer Pride March when it made its glorious return this month for the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Vishal Rai, a 23-year-old who got involved in the march, said, "It's good, it's fabulous, because we are here to celebrate ourselves, and after 3 years. Our heart goes out to our LGBTQ+ Indian comrades as they fight for their rights in this new post-pandemic landscape."
A much-needed win for trans rights comes to us from both Spain and Scotland, where lawmakers have passed gender self-determination bills allowing citizens over 16 years of age to change their registered gender without medical supervision. Under the Spanish law, minors ages 12 and 13 will need a judge's authorization to make the change, while those between 14 and 16 will have to be accompanied by their parents or legal guardians. This change removes a lot of barriers to self-determination, which, up to now, included requirements for a diagnosis by several doctors of gender dysphoria and, in some cases, proof of living for 2 years as the gender they identify with, or even records showing they take hormones. On the same day, the Scottish Parliament passed a bill to make it easier for people to change their legally recognized gender. The approval makes Scotland the first part of the UK to have endorsed allowing people to declare their gender on documents without the need for medical certification. TERFs in both countries fret that this blurs the concept of biological sex, to which we say, fuck yeah, it does. Gender self-determination is a queer practice which is all about blurring lines, concepts, and boundaries. So let's keep queering legislation until there's no point in legislating our bodies anymore.
In a much-needed win for reproductive rights in the United States, the Department of Justice has ruled that the U.S. Postal Service can deliver abortion pills by mail, even to states where abortion has been banned. Last November, conservative legal group Alliance Defending Freedom filed a federal lawsuit asking a Texas court to ban abortion pills from the U.S. mail. The suit cited an archaic 19th century anti-obscenity law, the 1873 Comstock Law, which banned sending obscene literature, contraceptives, abortificants, or any sexual information through U.S. mail. After the Supreme Court ruled in Roe v. Wade that women and people with wombs have a fundamental right to abortion, the Comstock Law remained on the books but was not enforced. Once the Supreme Court reversed Roe, anti-choice ghouls wondered if they could use the law to further strip abortion access from people in conservative states. Fortunately, the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel issued a legal opinion stating that the Comstock Law does not prohibit mailing abortion pills if the sender does not know that the medications will be used illegally. Individuals receiving abortion pills have a constitutional right to travel to another state that has not prohibited that activity and to ingest the drugs there, the opinion reads. So someone sending a woman these drugs is unlikely to know where she will use them, which might be in a state where such use is lawful. The decision applies to USPS and other carriers, such as UPS and FedEx, giving people who can get pregnant some additional options while living in states that ban abortions until we can get the church and the state out of our fucking uteruses for good.
Social media personality, self-described misogynist, and all-around vile piece of shit, Andrew Tate, along with his brother, Tristan, and 2 Romanian women, was arrested this month in Romania on charges of organized crime, human trafficking, and rape. Tate, who publicly stated that he moved from the UK to Romania specifically because he thought they'd be less likely to investigate him for rape, lost all 4 appeals to overturn a judge's decision to hold him for 30 days while under investigation. Prosecutors investigating the case have seized 15 luxury cars and more than 10 properties or land owned by companies registered to them. Ramona Bola, a spokesperson for Romanian anti-organized crime agency DICOT, said that if prosecutors can prove the Tates gained money through human trafficking, the assets will be taken by the state and will cover the expenses of the investigation and damages to the victims. After the appeals court upheld the arrest warrant extension, prosecutors can now request detentions of up to 180 days for the 4 people charged. While we are, of course, against carceral justice, we can only hope that Tate is stripped of his wealth influence, and access to young women, and permanently loses his platform to influence young men into misogynistic violence. Guess karma is a bitch, huh, Tate?
On New Year's Eve, anti-cop and anti-prison protesters gathered outside Montreal prisons to stand in solidarity with prisoners and demand justice for 21-year-old Nicholas Spring, killed in Bordeaux prison on Christmas Day. His detention has been ruled illegal by a judge that had ordered his release a day before his death. Alain Babineau, the director of the Red Coalition, an anti-racism advocacy group, stated, "We are looking for a much wider investigation into systemic racism and discrimination within the Quebec correctional system." More than 100 abolitionists joined in this show of support and solidarity with the prisoners. Defund, disarm, dismantle, abolish.
On January 8th, Puerto Rican political prisoner Belen Montes was released from prison after 21 years of incarceration. She was sentenced because, as a former U.S. intelligence analyst, she levied her position to subvert and alleviate the blockade and attacks against Cuba. In 1998, for example, she softened the U.S. government's unreasonable charges of Cuba's terrorist threat. In court, she testified, "I obeyed my conscience rather than the law. I believe our government's policy toward Cuba is cruel and unfair, profoundly unneighborly, and I felt morally obligated to help the island defend itself from our efforts to impose our values and our political system on it." Puerto Rican journalist Luis de Jesus said, "Belen Montes understood that the Cuban people have been and continue to be victims of constant attacks by an atrocious, inhuman, unjust imperialism that should not be."
On January 2nd, President Lula of Brazil implemented 6 pro-environment decrees revoking or altering anti-environment and indigenous measures from his predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro. One decree reintroduced action to fight deforestation in the Amazon and Cerrado biomes. Another gets rid of mining in indigenous lands and protected areas. And a third resumes the Amazon Fund to finance programs aimed at halting deforestation. Taking yet another unprecedented action, Lula has also established the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples to act on his promise to combat 500 years of inequality. In his inauguration speech a day prior, Lula stated, "Our goal is to achieve zero deforestation in the Amazon and zero emission of greenhouse gases in the electricity matrix, in addition to stimulating the reuse of degraded pasture land. Brazil does not need to deforest in order to maintain and expand its strategic agricultural frontier."
2022 marked the year of pro-environmental action in Indonesia. Indonesia's overall annual deforestation rate has been declining since 2016 and fell again in 2022. An analysis by Palm Oil Supply Chain Mapping Initiative, TRACE, found that deforestation in Indonesia associated with palm oil dropped by 82% in the past decade. The trend also appears to hold across the region, with palm oil-linked deforestation across Indonesia, Malaysia, and Papua New Guinea dropping for the second year in a row in 2021. The country is also putting $20 billion in international investments into developing renewable energy sources like wind and solar power, and to phasing out coal plants. Since Indonesia is home to the third largest expanse of tropical forest and amongst the biggest greenhouse gas emitters, this is highly consequential for the health of the planet and very welcomed news.
On the 16th of January, Finnish direct action activists set up camp in the forest of Alastunturi to demand an end to the logging of 400 hectares of the land by Finland's state-owned logging enterprise, Metsähallitus. The logging has not yet been approved by the Finnish Ministry of Environment, and activists ask that the area be granted national park status and protection. Continued destruction of this forest threatens biodiversity, culture, and local economies. On the 17th of January, 7 protesters and 1 bystander were detained by the police and held for 19 hours before being released. Vil Merman, one of the arrested, stated, "It is absurd that in a country that declares its goal to halt the loss of nature over the next 7 years, measures aimed at halting the loss of nature are not considered acceptable." Similarly, another protester, Ida Kornonen, aptly said, "State forests are the common property of all of us, but Metsähallitus is unsustainably logging them under police protection. This is not the work of a responsible state company." Solidarity with activists everywhere putting their bodies on the line to protect our non-human kin and the environment we all share.
Comrades, if you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to totalliberationpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams. Thank you to Cosmo for the positive news background. Thank you to Nick, Catherine, Ash, Mexi, and Jacob for script writing and production. And thank you to us for hosting this one. If you'd like to support the expansion of our team and output, please go to patreon.com/positiveleftistnews, or you can give us a one-time tip. The link is in the description box below.
Most of the time, we like to have those good news. Yeah, come on, sometimes.